the only way to be totally secure is to really have a trusting meeting with someone where no one's listening. But it's an interesting point to note, because I think, again, too many people think, well, I've got this app, I'm safe.
Welcome to Restoring America, a project of the Washington Examiner. As always, if you're watching us on YouTube or other platforms, please be sure to like and subscribe. Today, Tom Rogan. Tom, there's been a lot going on in the Trump administration this past week, and probably the biggest and maybe the only faux pas up to this point. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so the big issue, Jeremiah, is this Signal chat, which is an encrypted messaging app in which numerous Trump administration officials, led by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, but including the Vice President, Director of National Intelligence, CIA Director, Secretary of State, and others, were discussing planned military operations against the Houthis, which is a militant organization based in Yemen, and then discussing the actual timing and some of the details of the strikes. And the key point is that they thought it was just Trump administration senior officials on it, but Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, accidentally invited Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, into the thread, so he was sitting there seeing everything as well. So it's a pretty big security faux pas, both in the sense they should not have been using Signal to discuss this information, because Signal, though very good, can be broken into by capable intelligence services, and they should not have been discussing some of the details they were discussing in that fora. And now it's obviously Goldberg has printed all the details.
So I want to, we'll get to the content of the messages in a minute, but I want to ask you, what do you think should happen as a result of this breach? Because it was a breach, and we're seeing the White House is kind of trying to say, nothing to see here. We didn't do any, there was no classified information on there. The government uses Signal, which is a true fact. I mean, John Radcliffe, who was on the thread, told Congress that the CIA loads Signal onto their own devices. But what needs to happen here as a result?
Yeah, so I think there's a key difference. So the CIA will do that for internal stuff. So it's not communication across a geographic locale. In this case, Steve Witkoff was in Russia at the time. Russians can easily penetrate a device on their soil. Tulsi Gabbard was in the Pacific, I think maybe in India. So there are some differences with that sort of CIA point. But I think personally, that it should be a situation where someone has to resign, whether that's Hegseth for putting in some of the details about the operations, or Mike Waltz for inviting Goldberg into the group, or bringing him into the group without approval. The problem here is that you are talking about stuff that is patently classified. There's not really a debate. If you're talking about military operations and the specifics, the best example here, talking about F-18 fighter jets off the Harry S. Truman carrier, what time they're taking off, and the target set being generally Houthis with specific terrorists, although the names are not put in there. The ability for
the names and the location of the strike are not included.
The challenge with that, the reason that's inherently classified top secret, is that if the Houthis knew about that, if the Houthis were Goldberg, they could activate their surface-to-air defense systems, they could hide their people, they could anticipate where the strike might be coming from, they have a general idea of where the Harry S. Truman is operating. And that would risk the lives of F-18 pilots, because the Houthis have some capable air defense systems and have previously shot down American drones. Mm-hmm. So it is not a theoretical point so much as it is a specific concern of pretty serious national security. And I think the challenge for the Trump administration is that instead of saying, we screwed up big time, this won't happen again, there's this sort of silly, it's all fake news, whatever, which to me is very swamp-tastic and kind of much more representative of the Joe Biden, dribbling, debacle-style governance versus President Trump. This is a new era of proper strength.
Right, but at the same time, Trump is known for not, giving an inch. He's not gonna. If you give an inch, you're gonna giving a mile. Is kind of, I think, the way he thinks this way. And so, if you, as a political strategy, by, deflect and deny, what you're saying is like, you're kind of the idea is to project strength. However, I do agree that they should have kind of owned this and said, yeah, this was not supposed to happen. It's not going to happen again. I think Mike Waltz should lose his job for having Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number. alone. Jeffrey Goldberg has had a history of publishing salacious stories about Trump, most notably in the campaign in 2020 and then again in 2024. Pretty identical story, thinly sourced, about how Trump was calling dead soldiers, suckers and losers.
Right.
And I think Trump has always more specifically carried a grudge against Goldberg and the Atlantic because of that, because I think he was so personally insulted by that story. And to me, I think the fact that Mike Waltz would have his phone number is unforgivable.
Well, and we know, that the administration is very strict about who's talking to the media. We have friends who it's hard to get hold of because they're under such strict orders. And
Right.
so if the National Security Advisor is obviously doing that, I think you have a legitimate point. I would say, though, where Goldberg's prior reporting about the World War I, these losers, he didn't want to visit the cemetery, whether that's true or not, and a lot of people have said it's not true, some said it is, whatever. Clearly the sourcing on that was, way low beyond this. And this is true.
And the White House even admitted it was.
Exactly.
And that's a key difference here.
Right.
But again, to me, and then Waltz I think has been done some interviews since where he's like, well, I don't know, I didn't add him. Like,
Right.
he's like, are you kidding me?
Right.
You're making the problem worse by now denying basic facts that everyone understands are to be true.
And I think a broader point here, which might be interesting for our viewers, is that Mike Waltz is traditionally identified with perhaps someone like my kind of foreign policy views rather than the MAGA sort of purer, more skeptical about foreign entanglements. So you can bet that behind the scenes there are going to be the wagons circling.
Right, and I think that's a good point you brought up, and I think you can actually see this playing out in the messaging because a lot of the legacy media focus on this has been on Hegseth. A lot of the establishment national security apparatus has been on Hegseth. And to the point where some of them are even defending Waltz. Adam Kinzinger, famously one of the Republicans who voted to impeach Trump and has rebranded himself as a resistance hero, was like, well, why is MAGA going after Mike Waltz? Not, why aren't they going after Hegseth? Well, I mean, why are you defending Mike Waltz?
Right.
I think that doesn't speak well to Mike Waltz's own situation within the White House, and I think I really do believe he should lose his job. I don't know if he will, because again, back to my point earlier about how this is going as a matter of political imaging. You don't want to project a weakness and say, okay, we let this story have a head roll inside.
Well, I'm going to write about this, which I imagine might be up when this video comes out. That it's kind of interesting to see with all the sort of chaos surrounding the national security elements of the Trump administration. Kash Patel is coming out very well. I mean, his testimony on the Hill this week I thought was compelling, and Democrats and Republicans have been impressed by his willingness to engage with them more about FBI operations and records in a way that the previous director, Chris Wray, wasn't. He just comes across as sort of competent and focused in a way that I think President Trump is going to probably pay more attention to. So I think one sort of side note to this might be the kind of rising star of Kash Patel. And
who would have thought that was going to happen?
No, exactly. And who would have thought that Democrats would be saying this is, and I've spoken to FBI folks who are were deeply skeptical of Patel, and they've said it's so far so good. We like what we're seeing, and so. It's kind of an interesting dynamic early on in the administration for this to happen because it has that potential again to shake up the dynamics.
Yeah, I can imagine that Trump is not happy that Waltz had Goldberg's phone number in the first place, and he's standing by him right now. But I mean, Trump is known for shifting very quickly, and so I wouldn't be shocked if he comes, by the time this airs, he might be fired. So.
Right. Yeah.
It also, I think, one of the things that was really interesting in the chat to me was also showcasing the divisions. You kind of talked about the neoconservative kind of Waltzian, or Waltz is kind of more in the neoconservative camp, and then you've got Hegseth and J.D. Vance, who are much more skeptical of foreign entanglements. And you kind of saw that in the thread, in the chat, kind of play out a little bit, which I thought was really, really interesting, and goes to show that even behind closed doors, the Trump administration is kind of having this conflict that's helping them, I think, come to decisions in a more consensus-driven fashion.
Yeah, I thought the discussion point and the ability to agree, disagree was positive. But I think one final point that deserves noting is that, no encrypted app is truly secure. If a capable foreign intelligence service can have access to your device, either by proximity or physical access, they could get in there and essentially access your communications. And frankly, they can hack some of these apps, including Signal. And so, people, when they use these apps, should never be certain that it's totally secure. I think the only way to be totally secure is to really have a trusting meeting with someone where no one's listening. But it's an interesting point to note, because I think, again, too many people think, well, I've got this app, I'm safe.
Right. And I mean, even, for those of us that use Signal in general, like you kind of think of like, the disappearing messages and encryption, this is like the best thing that we can have. And, the feds aren't going to be able to listen to us, but they can.
And Trump has changed the rules so the feds can now spy on journalists again. So, or investigate journalists, I should say. So, yeah.
Well, Tom, good to see you again.
You too, fun.
Be sure to always check out our content at washingtonexaminer.com. And as always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I'm Jeremiah Poff with Tom Rogan. We'll see you next time.